cheating on her husband with her son's friends. Susan Clark, wife and mother, had sex. Susan Clark, a member of the New Hope Baptist Church choir, Sunday school teacher, and Girl Scout troop leader, and Susan Clark had no idea who she was making love to. She knew it had to be one of the young men who had come to her house. But who? She could rule out David. He was the one who had started it all, but he had tremendous dignity, whereas the one with her now was much smaller. Exhausted, she collapsed onto the bed. Footsteps rushed across the room, the door opened, then closed, and she was alone with her thoughts. How had she let this happen? What had made her become such a cheater? What would she say when her husband returned from his business trip? It had started out innocently enough. Her son Todd called from college and asked if he could take one of his friends with him on spring break. She asked Ralph, her husband, what he thought of the idea, and Ralph, quite predictably since he had never turned Todd down for anything, said, "Let them come." When the boys arrived, Susan was sunbathing by the pool in her shortest bikini swimsuit. She wasn't expecting the boys for several more hours and didn't anticipate anyone seeing her in the swimsuit, which she only wore when she was alone and tanning. So she experienced not only mild discomfort, but also the feasting eyes of 3 strangers as Todd introduced them to her body. The first was Daniel, tall and of sturdy build. Next was Tim, short and stocky, with the shoulders of a protector. Last was Norman, tall and very slender. They all gave thanks for being allowed to enter her home, and then Todd said, "Enough pleasantries. Everyone get dressed and let's go to the pool." Susan took advantage of the fact that they had gone to change and hurried to her room to change into a revealing outfit. When Ralph came home that evening, she told him what had happened, and he laughed. He said that knowing how she looked in that bikini, he suspected that they would probably have to go and huff away before they could change into anything. Over the next few days, the boys appeared and disappeared as Todd drove them around town, introducing them to a few girls he knew, finding out where the parties were, and generally doing what boys do when they're on spring break from college. While working in the kitchen, Susan watched the boys frolicking in the pool and couldn't help but notice the way the wet bathing suits fit around the boys' bodies. What she noticed most was that Daniel seemed to have a very large dignity. It made her uncomfortable for reasons she couldn't even guess at. Daniel seemed to notice that she was paying attention to his body and perhaps deciding that she would be interested in getting a closer look at him. Began spending more time around her, trying to convince her to put on a suit and join them in the pool. He would catch her in tight spots and rub his body against hers as he tried to squeeze past her. Susan was becoming very excited. She was simultaneously aroused by the contact and repulsed by what she considered to be boorish behavior. She decided to ignore Daniel for the few remaining days of his visit and not put herself in a situation where he might try to take advantage of the situation. 3 days after his visit, Ralph came home from work and informed her that he would have to leave town for a couple days to take care of business matters. The next morning as he left, he kissed her goodbye and said, "I'm not sure I'd enjoy going away and leaving you with all this young meat around. I might come home and find you no longer interested in the old man." Then he laughed and said, "Try not to hurt them too much." Try not to hurt them too much? Did he really think she would ever dare to do such a thing? Surely she would. Why else would he have said it? In the kitchen, preparing lunch and watching the boys by the pool, Susan turned her attention to Daniel's body and thought about Ralph's words. She had never seen any other men besides Ralph, and Todd when he was little, but she had never had the urge to see another one. She caught herself wondering what Daniel would look like if he wasn't restrained by a bathing suit. Putting those thoughts out of her mind, she called the boys to lunch and left. She needed to clean up the upstairs, and she wanted to get it done before she had to leave for choir practice. Around 2 o'clock, Todd called and said they were leaving and probably wouldn't be back for lunch. Susan finished cleaning up, undressed, and got in the shower. She was already drying herself off when, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement. Turning around, she saw Daniel standing in her bedroom, and he was as naked as the day he was born. I told Todd I wasn't feeling well and was going to stay here and rest. I've seen you watching me, and I know you want to see my body. With your husband out of town and the rest of the guys gone, this is as good a time as any. You want to make love to me? Come here and touch my body." Susan stood still, stunned to think. She stared at Daniel, conflicting thoughts running through her head. She should scream. She should run. She should grab something and throw it at him, but she did none of those things. Sensing her indecision, Daniel moved toward her, took her right hand and placed it on his body while pulling the towel off her body. "Unbelievable," he said. "This body should be immortalized in stone or in a painting. You're gorgeous." He continued to run her hand up and down his body, and then he leaned over and began stroking her breasts. She shuddered at the sensations that came over her, and her hand continued to stroke his as if on its own. She didn't protest when he picked her up in his arms and carried her to the bed. Her bed and Ralph's bed. Oh, God, what was she doing? She couldn't let this happen. She was a married woman who had never cheated on her husband, and she should have stopped it. But when he started having sex with her, she did nothing to stop him. He may be a child, she thought, but he knows exactly what he's doing. Then she pulled away from him and screamed, "No! You can't! We can't do this! It's wrong!" Daniel paid no attention to her and continued to have sex. She heard loud noises, and only after a moment did she realize that the sounds were coming from her. That night, Susan didn't make it to choir practice. She and Daniel never left their bedroom. As early as 1 o'clock in the morning, they heard Todd's car pull into the driveway. Daniel kissed her and told her he'd be back as soon as everyone was asleep, then hurried to his room. He returned at 3, and they made love like minks again, until 6 in the morning when he retired to his room again. It was 9 in the morning when Susan went downstairs to make breakfast for the boys. Daniel, Tim, and Norman were already at the pool, and the boys were laughing and cheering Daniel on as he talked to them. Susan noticed a few quick glances in her direction, and she had the paranoid thought that he was telling them about what he'd done to her. And that paranoia increased as Todd walked out to the pool, and the boys quickly split up and dove into the water. So he wouldn't find out about the cheater who had become his mother? The rest of the day passed without incident, and it wasn't until dinner time that Daniel found her alone and told her he'd come to her room after everyone had settled down and gone to sleep. "I don't know. We shouldn't have done what we did last night. It was wrong, and I know that. I don't think I can let it happen again." Daniel only smiled and said, "If the door isn't locked, I'll come in. If it is, thanks for last night." Susan went to bed early and planned to read a book until she fell asleep, but the book couldn't hold her attention. She glanced back and forth at the bedroom door. Finally, she put the book down, got out of bed, walked to the door, and locked it. Back in bed, she tossed and turned, running the memories of the night before through her mind. Why had she let it happen? Was she really just a cheater and never knew it? She could have stopped it. But why hadn't she? His body felt so good to the touch, and she had never had sex so good in her life. No one knew, and it had only been one time, right? Memories of it kept invading her thoughts. "Oh God, what's wrong with me?" she thought, getting out of bed and unlocking the door. In the complete darkness of the bedroom, she was tossing and turning and thinking, "What is wrong with me? He's only a boy, and this is so wrong." She was about to get up and lock the door again when she heard it open and close. Daniel slid into bed with her, and she was already waiting for him. They had sex for over an hour before Daniel pulled away from her. "I have to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back, so wait for me." He returned a few minutes later, and as he began to have sex with her, she had a flicker of a thought that he felt different somehow. Then lust overwhelmed her, and she tried her best to act like it. He only lasted about 5 minutes or so, and then pulled away and left the room. Susan was a little puzzled by this behavior, but before she could think about it, he was back in the room. "Where did you go?" she asked. There was no answer, only his hand fumbling with her body. The thought crossed her mind again that he felt somehow different, and again the thought vanished in a cloud of love. They had sex for several minutes. Susan opened her eyes. It wasn't Daniel's voice. It was low and unrecognizable, but it wasn't Daniel's voice. Suddenly, Susan realized what was happening. Daniel had set her up. He had sex with her and then left the room so that one of the other guys could do the same, and the other guy left to make room for the third guy. Susan was the centerpiece of the party. Even as these thoughts were running through her head, her current lover was making love to her. He pulled away and quietly left the room. As Susan lay there, she wondered if Daniel would be back for more. The door opened and closed, and footsteps approached the bed. Susan let out a sharp laugh and said, "What are you waiting for? Come here and make love to me." There were only 4 men in the house, and she knew she had had sex with 4 different men. "Oh, God," she thought, "this can't be happening. This just can't be happening." Susan Clark had made love. She didn't know who she was with. Susan Clark didn't dare turn on the light to find out. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.